Freakonomics is really, it's about a lot of things, a lot of stories, but what it's really about is incentives. We take the art or the science of economics, which is mostly useless, especially at predicting anything to do with the actual economy. We've learned that over the past few years, right? And we take some of the pieces of what economics does and we reduce it to the very simple idea that life is about incentives and that people respond to incentives and that it's a mistake to think of incentives in terms of just financial, right? There are financial incentives, yes, but there are social incentives and moral incentives and political incentives and so on. But really what we write about are the ways in which people respond to incentives, often in ways that the people who designed the incentives did not intend for people to respond. Everybody has preferences. There are two key things to know about preferences. People have different preferences, and just because someone has different preferences from you doesn't mean that they're wrong. It doesn't mean that they're an idiot. If you're in one political party, I find often one thing that politics does very well, it divides people wonderfully in a binary way. If I'm in one political party and I have a certain set of preferences, I look at the people in the other party and I can't even acknowledge that their preferences might be legitimate. I think that's a real failing of our political culture. The fact is, people do have different preferences. The other thing to know about preferences is that there are two sets, according to economists. Declared preferences, what you say you're going to do, what you say you believe in, right? And revealed preferences, what your behavior actually reveals about you, what your behavior does, not what your belief says. And what we do with Freakonomics is measure the gap between the two. And that's where life is, in that gap. Hand washing is a seriously big problem in hospitals, in part because the failure of hand washing can lead to bacterial infection, which is generally the biggest non-causal killer in a hospital. In other words, in the States alone, about 100,000 people die in hospital every year from something other than the reason they came in the hospital to not die from in the first place, okay? If that's your business model, is to help people not die of one thing, and you're killing 100,000 a year from something else, your business model is not working out so well, okay? The chief cause, bacterial infection. The best, cheapest, easiest way to fight that is better hand hygiene, okay? Of all the people who are in a hospital in a given day, patients, nurses, doctors, orderlies, janitors, who do you think is the worst at practicing hand hygiene? Just shout it out if you're thinking. Yeah, doctors. So we went and talked to some folks at an excellent hospital in the United States called Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, which is in Los Angeles. If you have cancer, God forbid, if you need an organ transplant, God forbid, if you have a car accident, God forbid, Cedars-Sinai is a great hospital to go to. On any dimension, they measure very well. But they, like just about every hospital in the US, even the best ones, had a very low hand hygiene rate among doctors. It was in the 60s. So they figure, all right, how do we fix it? The first thing they did, as we like to do in America, and I know you like to do it here in South Africa as well, they did the obvious smart thing. They formed a committee, okay? And the committee was called the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center Chief of Staff Hand Hygiene Advisory Committee. And it was made up of about 20 of the top officials in the hospital, the big guns in the hospital, including literally the chief of staff. They got in a meeting room and they said, all right, what do? We have the power. We know what we got to get done here. And they thought, well, let's do the smart thing. We're going to do what committees do. We'll issue a memo. And they issued a very strongly worded memo that told doctors that they had to change their behavior. And they sat back and they waited for behavior to change. They too deputized their nurses to watch. And the dial didn't move at all. The memo did nothing. And then they thought, all right, what do? We got to take our message to the wards, and we have to try some different incentives. So they tried some carrots, they tried some sticks, and nothing was working. Then they thought, all right, what if we take our message to the wards and we make it a kind of game? And they formed then what they called the Chief of Staff Hand Hygiene Advisory Committee Posse. And the posse would be made up of groups of 2 or 3 members of the committee that would travel in little packs to patients' rooms on the wards. And what they would want to do was try to catch doctors in the act. But here's what you have to think about whenever you're designing incentives. There are negative and positive incentives, right? Carrots and sticks. They didn't want to use a stick. They didn't want to catch doctors in the act of not washing and try to penalize them or shame them because they thought it would ruin morale, okay? Which to me makes good sense. So they created a positive incentive. They wanted to catch doctors in the act of properly washing. And when they would do that, they would they would like hide in a room behind a curtain or something, and they would jump out and clap for the doctor when they caught one, and then they would give the doctor a $10 Starbucks card as a reward, all right? Now, when I heard this, I thought it was just ludicrous. I thought, you're trying to tell me that you are trying to change the behavior of the highest earners in your hospital by giving them $10 of free coffee. And I thought, it's ridiculous. There's no way that anybody would respond to that. Well, I learned a very valuable lesson. I was totally wrong. Never underestimate the power of free, okay? It does not matter how much money someone makes. If something is free, they want it. So that didn't work. And by now, this committee was kind of desperate. And they had a big meeting. And finally, someone spoke up who hadn't spoken up before. It was the staff epidemiologist. And she said, I hope you don't mind what I'm about to propose, but, and she pulled out a bag with 20 Petri dishes in it, right? Agar plates inside the dishes to take a biological culture. And she asked all the big officials at the hospital to lay their palm prints in these Petri dishes, and she wrapped them up, sanitized them, and sent them to the lab for culturing. Her thinking was, here we are, the senior people at the hospital, telling everyone else to change their behavior. Let's make sure that our hands are literally clean and that we're not carrying this bacteria around. And when she got the results from the lab, it turns out that the vast majority of their handprints were teeming with bacteria, okay? The very people in charge were as guilty as anyone. And then they thought, all right, what do we do now? Could we create some kind of incentive to take advantage of this knowledge? Should we publicize the fact that, hey, we've been telling you what to do and we're just as guilty as anyone? What do we do? And that's when someone came up with a very good idea. As we know, a picture can be worth 1,000 words, yes? The hero of the story here was the IT guy at the hospital. He said, what if we take that palm print and make it the screensaver on every computer in the hospital? So that whenever a doc is wandering onto the floor, the first image they see is that disgusting image. And they did it, and it worked. But here's the problem. Look how much effort it took to simply get the most educated people in the hospital to do what they'd known all along they already should have been doing, right? That's how hard behavior change can be. For those who feel that global warming will be a huge problem, and who feel that the best or only way to fight it is by carbon mitigation, I'm here to say I don't think it's going to work for 2 reasons. One is the atmospheric half-life of carbon dioxide is about 100 years, which means that we've already put enough into the atmosphere to do the job if that's what we're worried about. The second part is this. You're basically asking everyone around the world to change their behavior voluntarily or quasi-voluntarily when it goes against their self-interest, by consuming less fuel, by changing their behaviors in all kinds of ways. And here's what I say to that. If it's this hard to get doctors to wash their hands in hospital, just imagine how hard it's going to be to change the behavior of 7 billion people who really don't want to change their behavior and for whom they don't see any tangible benefit. Okay, so I think that is really the crux of the problem when you're talking about climate change or pollution in general, which is why I think that the best solutions are going to come not from relying on behavior change, but from relying on innovation and technology and science. I thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you very much. Thank you.